Alrighty, guys, so we have a very interesting update in the world of Star Wars. And every time I feel like I say that, it's never a good thing because Star Wars is just in a perpetual state of chaos, especially when it comes to its movies. But, to be fair, we're coming off the high that was Skeleton Crew. Loved Skeleton Crew. What an amazing show. We have Andor Season 2 coming out, and I have no reason to believe it's not going to be just as good as the first season, so that's exciting. And then later on next year, Mandalorian and Grogu, Ahsoka Season 2, we'll see if it, can be better than the first season. But the films, right? The films have been just in a state of absolute chaos for almost the entire tenure of Kathleen Kennedy. I mean, think about it. You had, the Rogue Squadron movie announced. You had Benioff and Weiss, who were the creators of Game of Thrones, were going to develop a trilogy. Rian Johnson was going to develop a trilogy. Taika Waititi was going to direct a film. James Mangold is directing a film. There was going to be a Rey Skywalker movie that's just now nowhere to be seen. There was going to be a Boba Fett movie. There was going to be an Obi-Wan movie. And then those two got turned into series with different directors and different creative teams. It's been an absolute disaster, right, in terms of Star Wars movies, and not to mention the drama with Rogue One, which thankfully turned out great because I love Rogue One, and not to mention the drama with Solo, which, I think Solo is fine, and thank goodness it's fine because that production was a disaster, right? So Kathleen Kennedy has had her problems with creative differences, shall we say, with her filmmakers, and so that's the reason why we haven't gotten a Star Wars film in, has it been now, 6 years, and we're not going to get one for at the minimum 7 years between Rise of Skywalker and Mandalorian and Grogu. And the question is, what is the next film going to be? Well, it seems like James Mangold is, going full steam ahead on his Star Wars project at some point because he's got to direct a Star Wars project, he's got to direct Swamp Thing, he has other projects to work on, so who knows when James Mangold, I keep mixing up their names, James Mangold is going to direct his Star Wars movie, and that's going to be The Dawn of the Jedi, and that should be interesting, but I think he's kind of busy, though he is seeming to head into production or starting to think about the production at least somewhat soon. But then, another project, not to mention, I should also mention the Kevin Feige, Michael Waldron project as well. That's crazy that didn't happen. So anyways, but another director who had gotten attached to a Star Wars project was none other than Shawn Levy. Now, Shawn Levy is the director of Deadpool and Wolverine, but not only the director of Deadpool and Wolverine, he's also done films like The Atom Project for Netflix, and he's also directed and been, I think, one of the key contributors, storytellers, writers alongside the Duffer Brothers for Stranger Things, one of my favorite shows of all time. I think Shawn Levy is amazing. He did Free Guy as well. He just has a wonderful sensibility about him, where you kind of sit up and pay attention whenever he's directing a film, for me at least, because it's great. And so he was attached to direct a Star Wars film. We had no idea what it's going to be about. And I just kind of chalked it up to, we'll see. It'll come out, maybe, or maybe not, because none of the other Star Wars projects have come out. Well, The Hollywood Reporter has now come out with a headline, with an article here, that is seeming to indicate it's going to be happening very, very soon, or at least it's going to head into production, which doesn't mean it's not going to get canceled eventually, because other Star Wars films have been in production and then had all sorts of chaos and turmoil with it. But this Star Wars film, directed by Shawn Levy, is heading into production very soon. We're going to talk about that in a second, because apparently it's getting fast-tracked. And not only is it getting fast-tracked, it's getting fast-tracked because the star of the film is going to be none other than Ken himself, Ryan Gosling. So let's look into this article here and see what we can glean. So the first thing that the article talks about is that the details of this Star Wars project are pretty hard to acquire, other than the fact that it's not going to be related to the Skywalker saga. So that's another thing that we can, another Star Wars project that it's not going to be connected to the Skywalkers. It's just going to be its own standalone project. That's interesting. So again, but the article points out it's unclear whether or not the Jedi or the Sith are involved, and how far and how close it is to the Skywalkers. Nobody's been able to tell. It seems like, based on these sources. Now, the interesting thing, right, is that the article goes on to say, and I'm going to just read out this paragraph here because I think it's super interesting. So it says, quote, "Sources say the Gosling development is a late-in-the-game move for Levy's movie schedule. The filmmaker was eyeing to direct a boy band movie set up at Paramount, which could have reunited him with Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman. That was going to be a boy band movie that Ryan Reynolds was writing, I think, and then Shawn Levy was going to direct. It was just going to be their big reunion, kind of film after Deadpool and Wolverine, because they seem to have loved working with one another. Anyways, the quote continues, "But Gosling's interest and involvement suddenly shifted the Star Wars project into hyperspace. If a deal makes," that's an interesting way to put that. Anyways, "if a deal makes, the project would continue to fly like the Millennium Falcon." I don't know if I love or I hate the puns here that the Hollywood Reporter is putting in. But anyways, "it will fly like the Millennium Falcon, becoming not only Levy's next movie, but also the next Star Wars movie to go into production, with cameras potentially rolling this fall. The Mandalorian and Grogu wrapped up in mid-December and will be released on May 22nd, 2022. 6. And then it goes on to talk about the fact that Ryan Gosling is an A-lister, and Star Wars usually doesn't go after A-listers, which is true. I mean, Adam Driver certainly wasn't an A-lister. Now he's pretty well known. Daisy Ridley, obviously, John Boyega, they were good actors, but they didn't have that huge resume. Kind of similar to, I think Harrison Ford and Alec Guinness were probably the most well-known people in the original Star Wars. I'm probably forgetting someone famous, but Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher weren't super well-known, and they point out Liam Neeson was the A-lister in the prequel trilogy. But yeah, so it's interesting because Ryan Gosling seems to have basically walked up to Disney and was like, hey, I want to do a Star Wars film. And it seemed like however he got attached to it, he was eventually attached to the Shawn Levy project. So much so that it seems like Shawn Levy is just ditching his boy band movie for now. It could always come out later, and just fast-tracking the Star Wars movie. Do we take this to be a good or a bad thing? Let me just address the Ken. He's not Ken. He's Ryan Gosling. I almost called him Ken. The Ryan Gosling aspect first. Is Ryan Gosling being in a Star Wars movie a good thing? Absolutely it is. I mean, Ryan Gosling, first of all, and the article points this out, 3-time Oscar-nominated Ryan Gosling. That's not a small feat, by the way. For Ken, he was nominated for an Oscar, and I mean, let's be honest, Ken was a very singular kind of performance. It's not the kind of dramatic or heart-wrenching kind of performance that most people are nominated for Oscars for. Like, you don't put, for example, Ryan Gosling and say Oscar-nominated, Barbie Oscar-nominated, Ryan Gosling next to Silence of the Lambs Oscar-nominated, Anthony Hopkins. It's not the same kind of performance, but he was great in it, and he was amazing in it. But then you look at projects like La La Land. I don't know if he was nominated as an actor for La La Land, but I'm presuming that's one of the Oscars. La La Land, one of my favorite movies of all time, and he was great in it. So he's done dramatic roles. He was in The Fall Guy. He has that Oscar pedigree, right, where he can do projects that he is just transformative in. Not transformative in the same way as a Joaquin Phoenix or a Jared Leto, for better and for worse, is, for example, but he really can dive into roles and do the dramatic, right? He did The Notebook, and so he's great in that capacity, but he can also do that blockbuster so well. Barbie and Fall Guy, and even La La Land was a bigger film, not as big obviously, but Ryan Gosling in Star Wars, that's amazing. I think it's actually such great casting. He almost reminds me in a weird way of Chris Pine, in the sense that he just enters any kind of project and you're like, oh yeah, great casting, great casting. And obviously Chris Pine was great in Star Trek as well. So yeah, I mean, sign me up, right? Ryan Gosling being in a Star Wars film. The other thing though, the other aspect of this whole thing is that it seems like Ryan Gosling's involvement really fast-tracked this project. Is that a good or a bad thing? I'm going to say the jury's out, right? Because on the one hand, great, fast-tracking any Star Wars project to be coming out sooner when there's been radio silence on anything Star Wars. Yeah, I'll take anything Star Wars we can get. And if it means, we're going to get this Ryan Gosling movie in December 2022 or May 2022, 2027, great. I think the more Star Wars movies, the better, because we have just been starved of good Star Wars movies for a long, long time. So yeah, I mean, that's great. But on the other hand, this worries me a little bit too, because it almost, is screaming that same kind of reactivity that Kathleen Kennedy has been known for. Usually it's for the bad, right? It's for the worst, because she's usually axing projects and getting rid of people, and firing people and creative differences and whatnot. But, in this case, I wonder if this is the same kind of tendency where she's like, oh, great, Ryan Gosling wants to do it. Shawn Levy, let's go. And, I mean, for the record, if Shawn Levy has a great idea for a film, it may not be a bad thing, right? So I think on the surface and even, just in general, great thing, right? I think it's a good thing that Ryan Gosling is going to be in the next, post Mandalorian and Grogu Star Wars movie. I hope that this is not one of those reactive things where Kathleen Kennedy is like, hey, shiny object, Ryan Gosling, Shawn Levy, Deadpool and Wolverine, and Fall Guy, Barbie, let's do it. And then she just kind of greenlights it without having any idea what's going on. And then Shawn Levy, makes the, writes a script, and she's like, wait a second, I don't like this. And we have the whole chaotic mess that the film like Solo does. I hope that's not the case. I really do. Because if this can happen, and if it, just goes off without a hitch, just as much as any production can go off without a hitch, then yes, sign me up for a Shawn Levy, Ryan Gosling Star Wars movie. I can't wait for that. So we'll have to see where that goes from there. Guys, are you excited that Ryan Gosling is apparently going to star in the next Star Wars movie after The Mandalorian and Grogu, and it's going to be heading into production soon? If the rumors and the reports are to be believed, let me know in the comments down below.